Hello, hello. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Thank you, Sophie, for joining us even ahead of time today. Fantastic to see you all, and some people waiting in the chat and in the lesson queue before we went live. Excellent to see that ambition, to see that readiness to get started today. Fantastic to see. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our live stream for today. IGCSE, hello, welcome back. Lovely to see you again. I'm well. How are you? I feel like I haven't seen you in a minute, so I'm really glad to see you back. Today we're going to be looking at the theme of disillusionment and the American dream in The Great Gatsby. This is our 7th lesson and 7th live stream for The Great Gatsby. We started with an introduction and discussing context, for example, the Roaring Twenties, modernism, the American dream, as well as the plot and the characters and the setting and the themes. And then we moved into looking at key characters, so specifically Nick Carraway, Jay Gatsby, and Daisy Buchanan. Thank you, IGCSE. Good to see you too. And then we've been looking at different themes. So, for example, last lesson we looked at love and longing, and today we're going to be looking at this journey across the novel of the American dream. And we are going to be looking not only at Gatsby's vision of it, but how it changes across the novel as well. If this is your first lesson, as I said, we've got 6 other lessons full of content for The Great Gatsby. And if you take a look at my channel, hello Willow, thank you for joining us as well. If you take a look at my channel, we've got offerings not only of The Great Gatsby, but also Othello, A Streetcar Named Desire, as well. And then from the sort of at the beginning of May, we're going to be looking as well at The Handmaid's Tale, and then in June, finally at poetry. We're also going to be doing some cram sessions on Fridays going forwards. The dates aren't quite yet finalized, but I will let you know that we are going to be doing 3-hour cram sessions, live streams on Friday afternoons from 3 till 6. Not this week, but after break for the for Othello, for Streetcar, and for 2 different versions of poetry. So poetry unseen, and then poetry comparison. So if you need revision before mocks, before exams, etc., they'll all be there. Miranda, thank you for joining us. We've got the whole team here today. I'm so glad to see. Okay, let's get into Disillusionment and the American Dream. If this is your first lesson, I'm Eleanor. I'm one of the teachers at my EdSpace. Let's get started. So, some questions to review before we get into this trajectory of the American Dream. It's good to make sure that we've got a couple of ideas about it. We're solid on what that means. So put your ideas into the chat. What is the American dream? What is the American dream? What is it? We hear a lot about it. Do we know what it is? I can see people typing. Yeah, it's very much a tenet of the American culture and attitude. It is the belief that anyone who comes to the US so as Miranda said, despite status can become rich. Yes. Or more broadly than that, successful. So regardless of any background, class, history, family, previous nationality, etc., that they can make it and achieve success through hard work, dedication, and initiative. And that this was something that was different from other countries, particularly if we're thinking about the first colonizers of the US. We're thinking about, for example, the Puritans, who would have sought a different kind of life that was not possible in the English, Scottish, Irish, European, more broadly, power hierarchies in society, class systems in society. So they were saying, for example, this idea that America is the land of opportunity. And I'm putting this in quotes because this is the phrasing very much aligned with American culture and identity. America as the land of opportunity. Some ideas that stand out in the iconography are, for example, the Statue of Liberty, which has a poem on it that says, "Give me your tired, you're hungry, you're weak, you're poor, etc." Essentially, that the idea that America would take whoever would come and that it will be accepted there. Obviously, this was sort of the conception, this is the idealized view, but it is the way that American people are raised to believe, this idea of meritocracy, which is that if you work hard enough, you can succeed. Something that's debatable in the ideas here in The Great Gatsby, if it can exist, if you work hard enough, is it possible to get this? Or do some people get it and some people not? So this idea of this is an idea, but not necessarily one that's achievable. Then, what were the Roaring Twenties? What were the Roaring Twenties? They were this prosperous economic boom in the post-World War One era. And it was sort of as a consequence of the economy after World War One that the US became a world power for the first time in a real way. A place of economic growth, Miranda said. Yes, absolutely. The USA becomes a world power and the sort of world power in a major way. Absolutely. For example, things in terms of American politics, American attitudes, American economy, all were becoming extremely powerful, not just in America, but on a global stage for the first time. There were also developments during this time, in this economic boom. There were developments in technology, in society. So, as we said, things like um, fashion changing, attitudes towards women changing, cultural ideas, the ideas of cities being a much more common place for people to live, arts, social values, new opportunities for people, ideas like Broadway, Harlem Renaissance. There were loads of developments at the time. And because of this money, and also because of these new attitudes, and for example, things like everyone is suddenly living in cities, the economy changed and people's attitudes towards things changed. Previously, as Miranda said, yes, this idea of industrialization. Previously, people lived in agrarian or agricultural societies, rural societies, where they had to produce everything that they needed. Now, in the 1920s, with industrialization, it was much easier and quicker for people to buy things rather than make them, which meant that there was this new wave of consumerism and capitalism where people had a new attitude towards buying and a new attitude towards having. As I said, there were changes in society. It was a big time of change. And there was a movement away from tradition. This included, for example, the 18th Amendment, which started prohibition, the 19th Amendment, women's right to vote, new opportunities for people outside of that, for example, people of different racial, ethnic, national identities becoming American and being allowed to succeed. More freedom for women. Yes, Miranda, this idea of the new woman, so a woman who could vote, who had more freedom outside of the home, who had more of an education, who was more worldly. Yes. Then modernism. What's modernism? Modernism, well, partly a hint in the name itself. A movement, particularly arts, literature, architecture, movement in the 1920s. Again, influenced by the war, particularly because the people who were writing in it were disillusioned by the war. Their ideas of nationhood, what was important, traditions, values, faith had all changed. This is embodied in people like Nick and Gatsby as well, to a certain extent, perhaps not in the disillusionment, but the fact that they were soldiers. And it was a response to these changes in society. And like in the broader culture in the Roaring Twenties, people were breaking away from traditions. This was the same in the literature of the time. It was breaking away from traditions. So, not following the same rhyme schemes, not following the same expectations for what should go in a poem. Should sonnets traditionally only should be about spirituality or love. Here, they're writing sonnets about different ideas and saying, well, I don't have to follow these rules anymore. They're breaking conventions of spelling, of grammar, of attitude, of perspective, of the structure of a novel. So breaks from traditions and saying, well, all of that previous stuff is meaningless. There was a lot of idea with the disillusionment of things being meaningless. Nationhood is meaningless. God is meaningless. Society structure is meaningless. The pursuit of whatever, truth, hope, success, meaningless. Because there's no point, because humans are now either disappointing or much worse than people believed. Remember, World War was the first time a lot of people had seen war on that scale, technology in war on that scale, etc., the devastation on that scale, crimes against humanity on that scale. And the threat of destruction was very real and wiped out the whole lost generation, right? So this idea that people could no longer place their faith in leaders, in society as being fundamentally good if society could create those conditions of war. With this, there was a focus on realism. So let's see, focus on realism. So for example, a little bit later, but within the same movement, think, for example, of the Great Depression and a famous picture of a woman with her children in the Dust Bowl. I can give you an example if you bear with me. It's called Migrant Mother. And this is what it looks like, famously here. This picture was suddenly the art of the day, rather than paintings, rather than pursuing this beauty, this idea of a mother being, you know, this perfect angel in the house that we'd seen in previous generations. Now we see a mother like this. This is gritty. This is raw. This is real, right? This is showing suffering. This is showing poverty. It's showing desperation. In previous generations, someone who was working class would not be the feature of art or the feature of literature. But modernists said, well, forget about that, those rules. We're going to show what we want to show. We're going to show what's real because we don't believe anymore in these ideas of faith and hope and nation. So again, another break from those attitudes, and particularly a focus on the working class and on real people and on real society. So showing things like factories, cities, machines, cars. She looks tired, Miranda agreed. Remember, she's in the Great Depression. So in addition to tired, probably hungry, suffering, having a difficult time. Absolutely. How are these modern attitudes towards the American dream different from those of previous generations? In a way, it just seemed much more meaningless to them than previously. Hello, Anmol. Thank you for joining us. So there was this idea of disillusionment again. Disillusionment means the illusion of the things you believe really deeply, you no longer believe in. It's like a loss of faith. So this idea that the American dream is perhaps impossible, to achieve, it's meaningless perhaps. This idea of questioning faith in the humanity, in whether people are able to, for example, make it. So not just faith in humanity, but also in society, whether humanity and society are inherently good or not, or if they're inherently indifferent. There being, for example, rather than a loving, a caring God, an indifferent God. And they were seeking authenticity. They were seeking reality rather than optimism and idealism. So in a way, that's why we need to have Nick as our narrator in The Great Gatsby rather than Gatsby, because Gatsby is not these ideas of modernism. He's a previous generation's idealism and hope and faith in something like the American dream, that it will all work out if he works hard enough. Having Nick there to show the reality is actually what grounds the novel by making it clear to any outsider looking at Gatsby that he's not going to make it, even if he works as hard as possible. Let's consider the trajectory of the American dream here. So, for example, this could be an exam question. Explore how Fitzgerald presents the American dream in The Great Gatsby. Or this could, for example, if you're in year 12 thinking about coursework, this could be a coursework title for next year if you choose The Great Gatsby, or have The Great Gatsby as one of your texts. Is, okay, how is it presented? So how can we think about this? Think about this arrow as from the start of the novel to the end of the novel, because I would argue, and hopefully you would agree with me, that the novel's attitude towards the American dream changes across the novel. For example, think about why Nick is even in New York at the start. He's in New York to learn the bond trade and become a bond salesman. And at the end, he leaves New York and goes home. Let's think about why. Let's think about why. Well, at the beginning, we have this hope, right? He starts full of hope. He arrives in New York saying, I'm going to make it. Right? This idea of idealism and him moving to New York as being idealized, right? He takes a house in the Hamptons, well, in Long Island, etc. Wow, how do we know this? For example, we have ideas like the description of him lining up all of the instruction manuals for how to become a bond salesman on his shelf and then promising to tell the secrets of Midas. Midas is a character from Greek mythology who was given the supposed blessing of anything he touched can turn to gold. Of course, this inherently becomes a punishment because he touches people and then they turn to gold and he loses them, right? Could this perhaps be an interesting foreshadowing that Fitzgerald is doing here by presenting these ideas of gold and Midas as these transformative elements that could change someone's life for the better, but also have this unintentional or unforeseen negative side to them. For example, Gatsby's accruing of wealth, his desperation for success actually leads to what? To his death, right? And to his destruction because he cannot get enough of it. That greed of Midas of wanting to have gold more than anyone else and becomes its own punishment. And then we have sort of the well, firstly, let's say we have the green light, right? This idea of the longing for it to achieve the American dream. Through the green light, through the gold imagery as well, through the idea of Daisy, as well as this idol, as she's described from the beginning, as someone who's this embodiment of wealth and privilege. They're paralyzed with happiness. This is sort of this cynical view of the upper class having it all. And this idea of discovery, individualism, the pursuit of happiness is what we're starting out with at the beginning of summer. It's very similar to the rhetoric of America, right? Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness is in the preamble to it is in the Declaration of Independence, the preamble to the Constitution. All of those documents have that kind of phrasing in them. And the inspiration then for this American dream, we have the figures of the American dream. We have Daisy. We have Dan Cody. We have this idea of the past and this idea of youth striving for the American dream. And we have Gatsby as someone who strives for it. Does Daisy Buchanan is what I mean. Striving for it and achieving it. Him being the success. And after that, we have these ideas of hard work, grifting, hustling. This sort of continues to eke out across the meritocracy of him being so successful, working so hard, this idea of um, then later the disillusionment. Miranda, can we think that they're a bit lost in the sense that this new era is new for them as well? Who do you mean they? Do you mean the modernists? I'm going to wait for you to type your answer to that. Disillusionment, this is when we find out the truth, right? The truth about Gatsby's past. For example, things like undesirable elements are introduced, like Meyer Wolfsheim. This idea of Gatsby being a bit squirrely when he says, "That's my business." This element of criminality that we have later, him being rumored to have killed a man, that keeps coming up. Prohibition, the phrasing of his name as Gat, which means gun in slang. That all encapsulates Fitzgerald's attitudes towards the American dream, is that this is a culture that has decayed social and moral values, and that the pursuit of the American dream has turned into this idea of grifting, hustling, criminality, doing whatever it takes, not in an idealistic way, but in a real way of killing people, committing crimes, doing immoral things to get what you want, rather than just working hard in a really idealistic way. And thus, this idea of when we are continuing to fight and fight and fight and fight for this, as then this disillusionment becoming a revealing of corruption, because Gatsby is never satisfied. He can never get enough. Even when he gets Daisy, he's not enough. And the phrasing is so significant here. When she must have tumbled short of his vision, his enchanted objects having diminished by one. The green light no longer being Daisy, but being something else. Him having lost that power of the green light. He has Daisy, but even then, this idea of him being disappointed with her as well. This then builds in with the motifs of gold, which at the beginning was this Midas touch and this everything being shiny and wonderful, to fading gold, yellow, dust, ashes, these drunken parties that reveal the rich and upper classes' empty pleasures, recklessness, decadence, greed, cynicism, corruption. How is this particularly achieved? Through the motif and the imagery around cars as well as gold. Cars at the beginning, these growling monstrosities, for example, Gatsby's car, this huge Rolls Royce, that is racing and rushing through. All these cars are always racing through. There's a smaller car crash at one of Gatsby's parties through someone being drunk and careless. And then after this, of course, the major car crash in which Myrtle Wilson is killed, and everything sort of falls apart. Everything is fractured. Of course, paired with the revelation of Gatsby's real past and reputation to Daisy, it all comes crashing down in this huge monumental car crash that reveals the depth of the upper class's immorality, because they are going to go to the extent of killing someone, getting away with it, framing someone else who then is subsequently killed because they are believed to be involved, and they escape and just pin it all on someone else and leave someone else to clean it up. And then at the end, we're left fundamentally with disillusionment, with corruption, with the valley of the ashes, with burnt offerings, and with flight from the East Coast. Literally, Nick leaves because he cannot deal with it anymore. He's so disillusioned. And with Wilson killing himself after killing Gatsby, and Nick describes, Fitzgerald really describes, that the Holocaust was complete. Now, remember, this is before the Holocaust, what happened in World War II. So that's not what this means. Remember, this book was published in 1925. So the Holocaust, then, the actual word means burnt offering. So that means that this idea of something being burnt to ashes, something being sacrificed and irredeemable, unable to be fixed, is at the end here. And so these symbols go from this green light, this searching, this reaching, and this gold that's so close in touch, to the eyes of T.J. Eckelberg, the Valley of the Ashes, and this emptiness, as it's revealed that all of this hope, optimism, idealism is actually emptiness and pointless and meaningless, etc. Kian, you're following so far? Great. Okay, good. Let me know if you have any questions. So let's first look at the green light as a symbol that famously encapsulates Gatsby's yearning. When you start, you don't know in that first version of, or first presentation of the green light, what it is that's being yearned for, because we see Nick, of course, watching Gatsby in this first quote. He stretched out his arms toward the dark water in a curious way, and, far as I was from him, I could have sworn he was trembling. Involuntarily I glanced seaward, and distinguished nothing except a single green light, minute and far away, that might have been the end of a dock. So we don't know what Gatsby is reaching out for. We just see him, who we haven't even met yet, reaching out. We don't know the love story. We don't know anything about him. So what is this first presentation giving us then? We have this idea of longing and yearning, particularly for something in the distance. That's shown through this physical description of stretching out his arms towards the dark waters, towards something far away, literally minute and far away. And this longing being so intense that he's trembling. And this speaks then, because of course we know later that this is Daisy he's reaching out for in his mind. But this reaching out becomes more than that as well. Because Daisy for him is the embodiment of the American dream. He sees Daisy and he thinks that's what success looks like, is having Daisy and becoming an equal to her. But also, if we think about these connections and connotations of green, green can symbolize wealth, prosperity, success, and thus we're getting to the language of the American dream already. If we also think about the more common ideas of green as well, we can also think of things like life. So thus, the American dream is linked to life and to success, particularly financial success, because green is the color of money in America. And so Gatsby then is completely dedicated to this pursuit, to this reaching out, this longing to achieve, to get something that we know is Daisy, but is also what Daisy represents, which is the American dream. But this reaching out for something so far away that reveals us to two ideas. Firstly, the separation, this idea of reaching out for something you do not have, this continuous pursuit, and this single focus, literally says single green light, this single focus on something out of reach, which then reframes the positioning to something which is continuously being reached out for and struggling and striving for something that's out of reach in a completely focused and dedicated way. There's all this other stuff we could be looking at, but we're zoomed in and locked in on this one single point of achieving this very small and narrow version of success, which is financial success at this time. But with this as well, this reaching out, remember this is a dark area, so we can't see, or this is a dark setting, so we can't actually see perspective here at all. So this means then that Daisy and the American dream are this idea of idealized perfection, of reaching for something, not being able to grasp it, but it also being idealized. But it's not real. And as we see across the novel, Daisy and this American dream that Gatsby wants have this idealized perfection for him that, for example, in the case of Daisy, she does not deserve or possess, right? She is not perfect and idealized. She's actually kind of an immoral person, perhaps in some ways justifiably for a woman in the 1920s, but also this idea that she can't actually be possibly perfect. That's an unfair standard, as well as this idea that she shouldn't be held to that standard of perfection. And the same with the American dream, this unworthiness of pursuing it because you can either never achieve it or when you do, it's unsatisfying. This idea of the constant pursuit because but Fitzgerald revealing that this to him, in his perspective, is futile. Then in the middle of the text, once Gatsby has finally, in the first meeting with Daisy, when they are reunited, re-meets her. Clearly, they get back together, reconciled, etc. And this is the quote. You always have a green light that burns all night at the end of your dock. Daisy put her arm through his abruptly, but he seemed absorbed in what he had just said. Possibly it had occurred to him that the colossal significance of that light had now vanished forever. Compared to the great distance that had separated him from Daisy, it had seemed very near to her, almost touching her. It had seemed as close as a star to the moon. Now it was again a green light on a dock. His count of enchanted objects had diminished by one. A couple of elements that are important here. Couple of ideas here. Feel free to put your answers in the chat as well, or your thoughts in the chat for what this could mean. Firstly, he confesses this to her, and it seems romantic, right? That he thinks now that she has realized that she still loves him too, or still cares about him too, or cared about him in the past, they're reunited, etc. That this is, in his mind, a natural thing for him to reveal that he stands out there looking at her, the green light on the end of her dock, and longing for her. But interesting, because this idea of it burning all night, this light being on all night out of reach, this idea of the continuous struggle and continuous lack of fulfillment of the American dream. So it is continually burning, this idea of you cannot stop in your pursuit of the American dream. It's something that has to be a continuous struggle. This passion, for example. But then he literally has what he wants. She put her arm through his abruptly, but he is actually focusing on what he said. This idea that he has technically just got what he wanted. He should maybe be focusing on her putting her arm through his, which is a gesture of intimacy, right? But he is thinking about what he said. And this idea, perhaps, that this is a disappointment, that he's got what he wanted and maybe it should have been a better feeling, for example, which maybe we've felt as well, right? That idea that you work really hard for something, or you put all your hope on something, or you imagine something to be really good, and then when you get it, it's not as good as you think it is. So Miranda, like today's society, subject consumerism, etc. Absolutely, yes. And what he was dreaming so long now seemed achieved, and he felt emptiness. Absolutely, I would say so as well. You're absolutely right. And that colossal significance of this light. So then we think of this light as, rather than connected to Daisy, as in tension with her. Is the pursuit of her actually, and the idealized version of her, actually better than the real version of her, who has a kid, is no longer 18, has moved on, has had a husband who she also loves? It's unfair to hold her to that expectation of idealization, but also it must be disappointing for him, right? And then this idea of seemed as close to the stars as the moon. So this celestial imagery, again, idealizing her. He's out and reaching out for her. But the distance as well, a secondary distance to the light and the dark. Now we have this star and moons, this idea of distance really being focused on here and brought out, because Gatsby, no matter how hard he tries, will still be separated from Daisy. And there's a quotation we're going to look at in a little bit, talking about the invisible barriers here, right? He can be reaching out for as much as possible, but there will still be these invisible barriers separating him from it and from her. And it seems like this encounter of enchanted objects, this transformational element, this idealized magical element, it seems that there are infinite possibilities when she / the American dream is out of reach. It's this idea of dreaming and idealizing. But when you get it, it's just that's you don't get the sense of fulfillment, because you have to keep going and going and going. The magic is actually lost to a certain extent. And Nick even suggests maybe it was that even that afternoon that Daisy already had disappointed Gatsby to a certain extent. And then this final quotation here, as I sat there brooding on the old, unknown world, I thought of Gatsby's wonder when he first picked out the green light at the end of Daisy's dock. He'd come a long way to this blue lawn, and his dream must have seemed so close that he could hardly fail to grasp it. He did not know that it was already behind him, somewhere back in that vast obscurity beyond the city, where the dark fields of the Republic rolled on under the night. Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgiastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms further, and one fine morning. And so we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. So this idea then of linking Gatsby to the colonizers of America, the founders of America. In poetry, roughly translated, I love my dream in you. Exactly, that idea of idealization. Miranda, very nice link there. And Gatsby's wonder, this idea of him being compared to these colonizers who founded New Amsterdam, for example, which was the original name for New York by Dutch settlers. It seems so close that there's no way. So it's like he's arriving to America for the first time in this metaphorical language here. But this idea of the American dream already being behind him, that the American dream to society has been lost already. It's that idea of it is no longer possible. And there's this juxtaposition between the American dream, this idea of reaching out, tomorrow we'll get there. If we keep working, we'll get there eventually. And the reality of us continuously fighting against a current, the movement of a river, for example, or the sea, where it's directing you towards a certain way and you're fighting against it. That means you're continuously having to fight against it, but it's pushing you back into the past, so pushing you away from your goal continuously. So this idea of the appeal of the American dream being continuously out of reach. But this linking with the settlers and the colonizers, this original American dream, however, Gatsby, like this early idea of America, is now dead. So the dream, the American dream, is now dead as well, like Gatsby. Then, let's think of a different kind of argument here. Gatsby embodies the achievement of the elusive but extolled American dream. So in other words, his life and him as a character embodies the American dream. He is the American dream personified. Let's see. So firstly, this idea of his parents were shiftless and unsuccessful farm people. This idea that he came from nothing. So very much American dream language, right? You can make whatever of yourself. Your background doesn't matter. It is described on purpose this way, to show his own ambition and his fulfillment. He came from nothing and he made something of himself. Nothing to something. That's Gatsby. That's the American dream. He's self-made, and this idea of upward social mobility, so being able to change your social circumstances and move in your class. Remember, class more complicated in a way in America in that it's not rigid, so you can climb between different classes based on wealth and not class, but also there are remnants of class as well that impede you. This is Gatsby's father, Mr. Gats, saying Jimmy was bound to get ahead. He always had some resolves, something like this, or like this or something. Do you notice what he's got about improving his mind? So, okay, humble origins again, Jimmy. But then this idea of Gatsby being linked to his improvement book, the flyleaf of his routine. This comes right at the end of the novel where it says, wake up this time, read at least 2 edifying books a week, no more gum chewing, all these things to make himself better or more improved in a way, to make something of himself. But it's interesting because this idea and this idea of self-improvement and being self-made comes from one of the founding fathers of America, Benjamin Franklin, inventor of things like the bifocal and the public library, etc. And this idea of self-improvement really stems from him in terms of the American conscious. Obviously not solely an American idea, but in the American version, Benjamin Franklin is very much aligned with this. However, his version of things was to become a more moral, spiritual, upstanding person. That's what Ben Franklin's version of this was to become a better person, member of the community, to become a more developed, moral, educated person. Whereas Gatsby's version is a kind of corruption of that, in which he's not trying to become a better person, he's trying to become a richer person at whatever cost. And clearly he will do whatever it takes to do that. So this is ironic then, that this idea of self-improvement is not for the mind and the soul and the community anymore, but rather for something selfish and materialistic and superficial. So in that way, one critic has described Gatsby as kind of his God is not Franklin's God or necessarily, a religious God, but rather the God of wealth, Mammon, the God of, or the devil, who is this God of riches and wealth and earthly delights and earthly pleasures, etc. So this idea of wanting to make something of oneself, but tied intrinsically through this reference and allusions to Benjamin Franklin's Book of Improvements to the American dream as well and to the history of America. then in the next idea, it was James Gatz who had been loafing along the beach that afternoon in a torn green jersey and a pair of canvas pants, but it was already Jay Gatsby who borrowed a rowboat, pulled out to the Tuolumne, and informed Cody that a wind might catch him and break him up in half an hour. Here we have the same person twice, but in a way we also have two different people. We have James Gatz and we have Jay Gatsby. And these two characters are juxtaposed here. James Gatz being the son of shiftless and unsuccessful farm people, someone who is from nowhere, someone who is nothing, societally speaking, who has a torn jersey, loafing around, etc. This shiftless, unfulfilled, nothing person, juxtaposed with Jay Gatsby, who has initiative, who borrows a rowboat, goes out to the yacht, Dan Cody's yacht, and shows expertise and says, be careful because this wind that's incoming is going to wreck your boat. So takes the initiative, takes the opportunity, demonstrates his knowledge and skill, and thus becomes the next thing, which is Dan Cody's second in command, best friend, all different roles he plays. He goes to Europe, he travels, he learns about upper class culture, he gets bought clothes of upper class culture, and he models his life on Dan Cody's life as well. Of course, Dan Cody is obviously rich and upper class, so it's this facsimile, this poor facsimile of what Dan Cody is, in a way. This juxtaposition then of one and the other, of his past and his present, his history and what he makes of himself. That really does show this idea of taking initiative, thus becoming success, and what he's born as versus what he could become. So we could definitely analyze those two different and juxtaposed characters of James Gatz and Jay Gatsby, for sure, as conceptions, as embodiments of two different ideas. What you're born as is determining who you are, and what you make of yourself, and what defines those two. The next quotation, the truth was that Jay Gatsby of West Egg, Long Island, sprang up from his Platonic conception of himself. He was a son of God, a phrase which, if it means anything, means just that. And he must be about his father's business, the service of a vast, vulgar, and meretricious beauty. So he invented just the sort of Jay Gatsby that a 17-year-old boy would be likely to invent, and to this conception he was faithful to the end. Now, there, a couple of words. Meretricious means apparently attractive, but with no real value. So something that is fake or garish or flashy, but not actually real on the underneath. So the idea of like all that glitters is not gold. But then also, this word Platonic comes from Plato, this idea of idealized versions of things, the ideals of something that comes from Plato's philosophy. But this phrasing as well is actually an allusion to one of Fitzgerald's inspirations here. This idea of him being a son of God, springing from Platonic self. And then here we go. Okay, so these couple of bits. Platonic conception first. So Platonic conception, this idea again of himself being the idealized version of himself that he came up with himself. So he made this idea of himself. Apologies, my screens are just giving me a warning, so I just need to toggle the switch at the back. Bear with me. That should be okay now. Okay. So yes, this idea of him as imagining up his own idea for himself and it being an idealized version. Then this idea of him being a son of God. This comes from Ernest Renan's book, Life of Jesus, which is documented as something that Fitzgerald was interested by and had written about. And in Renan's Life of Jesus, the story is about, or the idea is about the fact that in Renan's view, which was a little bit blasphemous for anyone who was reading it at the time, this idea that Jesus decided he was the Son of God, and sort of conceptualized this idea of himself as a son of God and as immortal and divine and everything. And because he couldn't face the reality, he then caused his own ruin. So he was put to death because he couldn't accept this idea of himself not being the Son of God. And interestingly, we've got a couple of different ideas there. So this idea of a self-fulfilling prophecy, or something being one's own self-destructive cycle there, not being able to see reality and thus destroying oneself, perhaps that's all J. Gatsby immediately. But then also this idea of this religious devotion. He's almost monastic in his devotion to his pursuit of Daisy and the American dream. This idea of him, again, this idealized image, a quasi messiah here, who is a sort of prophet or priest of a god, but not the religious god, but rather the god of modern society, which to Fitzgerald perhaps is wealth, right? So literally the opposite of what God is meant to be in most religions, right? But this idea and this religious imagery here, this semantic field of religious language, then links to this idea of this devotion, this almost literary religious devotion to the American dream. And this God, this rather than being a good and benevolent God, is vast, vulgar, and meretricious. So this being a corrupted, decadent image of what God looks like that ties very much into the modernist views of society and what society had devoted itself to, which was not previous ideas of faith and society. Okay, next bit. Out of the corner of his eye, Gatsby saw that the blocks of the sidewalk really formed a ladder and mounted to a secret place above the trees. He could climb to it if he climbed alone, and once there he could suck on the pap of life, gulp down the incomparable milk of wonder. So a couple of ideas here as well of the blocks of the sidewalks, this idea of an upper class neighborhood, literally like social climbing. Literally, if he's associating with people in that society, it's like he's stepping up in the world. But there's also an idea of Jacob's ladder reaching to heaven, right? So this idea then of upper class society as being linked to heaven, that links with Fitzgerald's presentation of Daisy and Jordan as silver idols, them as linked with white and gold and silver broadly, this pursuit of this devotion to them, etc. And this secret place. And this also links to the individualism of the American dream and of American identity in general, this idea of making it on your own, striving, self-making, and the individualism of society at the time, which Fitzgerald also does not like. This idea of people breaking from community and sort of turning against each other, this being a rat race, in stepping on each other to get ahead, that is linked to these decayed morals, decayed societal values, corruption, etc. This idea of sucking on the pap of life. So there really is an element of supposed immortality, believed immortality to Gatsby himself that we can see would not be the case, right? That seems foolish and hubristic for him to believe. and there's suck on the pap of life. So this idea of the moon, again, linked to Daisy, virginity, purity, distance, perfection, reaching, idealizing, etc. That he can sort of suck on the juice of the moon or of, this kind of world and gulp down this incomparable milk of wonder, this idea of nourishment, that if he reaches this success, it will nourishment and this kind of pursuit, nourishing him and developing him and becoming this idea of if he reaches it, he will become immortal. He thinks that he does enough. He can transcend his birth and be equal to Daisy, but also essentially be equal to God, right? He can transcend human failings here. So he's thus committed. Now he's committed. He kisses Daisy, married to her breath, etc. Then he makes it, right? He goes from farm people, torn green jersey. He takes the opportunities, earns them through his own merit by being brave, winning medals in the war. He becomes an officer. He rises through the ranks. Remember, he's covered in medals, according to Maya Wolfsheim. He goes to any of the universities in England or France. This is not something that working class American people could do. This was university in general, particularly notable universities, and by that I mean ones whose names everyone knew. That wasn't somewhere local, but was these elite institutions of education like Harvard and Yale. So Yale, where Nick and Tom went, or Oxford, where Gatsby went, are the highest status in society. So he's done it. He's made it. He's brave. He's good in the war. He fights hard. He survives. And thus he's able to access a higher part of society. And so perhaps he does have this opportunity to transcend previously what was his class and his limitations. He seized that opportunity. And this is Nick driving with Gatsby. Anything can happen now that we've slid over this bridge. This is the bridge into Manhattan. Anything at all. Even Gatsby could happen without any particular wonder. So this idea then that this fantasy can become a reality. So Gatsby can become somebody because New York, one of the iconic places of American industry, success, etc., gives people the opportunity to do so. And this bridge becoming a transitional metaphor, a liminal space in which we cross from fantasy to reality, from lack of success to success. And for joining America here. And Gatsby could happen. So this idea that Gatsby, literally Jimmy Gatz's fantasy, can be achieved in America and can be achieved particularly in New York. Then, but there was a change in Gatsby that was simply confounding. This is when Nick comes in after Gatsby's being reintroduced to Daisy. He literally glowed. Without a word or a gesture of exultation, a new well-being radiated from him and filled the room. He's made it. He's become successful. He's achieved the American dream. He's got the girl. He's got the house. He's got the millions. He's made it. Success fills the room. He has done it, right? Light is linked with success, is linked with this glow that's also linked with the green light. It's like he becomes the green light in a way, right? He's literally glowing. He's achieved it. He's embodied it here. But then, of course, everything comes crashing down. That at the end, we have this kind of elegy for Gatsby in which he is returned to the same idea of the old island that once flowered for Dutch sailors' eyes. So again, linking to the colonizers of America, this idealized, nostalgic past. This idea of a fresh green breast of the new world. This idea, again, of sucking the pap of life, this idea of the juice, nourishment, milk, breastfeeding, etc., becoming this life force. And America becoming this life force, this land of opportunity and land of plenty, if you believe in it, this idea of the new world, Gatsby believing in the new world, but this fresh green breast being very much juxtaposed again to Myrtle's torn left breast, right? This idea of that fresh green breast has now been destroyed. With Myrtle's, that nourishment and life has all been destroyed. This land of opportunity, American dream, new world, now destroyed. And a couple of critics here for you to consider as well. Hollister, for example, says on a flyleaf is a schedule. This is talking about the flyleaf schedule, Benjamin Franklin. Is the spirit of self-improvement traditional since Benjamin Franklin, the icon of the self-made man, and an originator of the concept of the American dream? So there we go, that link between them, fundamental. Fitzgerald parodies Gatsby's adolescent adaptation of Franklin's list of virtues to be developed in pursuit of moral perfection. Gatsby doesn't want moral perfection. He wants success. He wants money. Gatsby is immature in having invested all his hope in pursuing a finite goal in the material world, merely plucking a shallow daisy. So then daisy becomes this small, insignificant, superficial. Like a daisy is not a tree, right? It doesn't have roots the way a tree does. It has little tiny roots, which suggests that it is sort of a futile, meaningless thing to have achieved daisy. And that rather than pursuing a spiritual goal, an unattainable idea such as moral perfection in the tradition of Christ or Ben Franklin. So they do that he's a son of God, sure, but he's not Christ. He's the son of the God of wealth and material possessions, the God, in fact, of the son of the Roaring Twenties and of the modern world. Trilling says he comes inevitably to stand for America itself, right? This idea of American dream that thus is never achieved and is destroyed in the pursuit of. And Will says Gatsby's story is our story. His fate and the fate of the nation are intertwined. So what is then Fitzgerald saying about the fate of the nation? It's a little bit of a damning statement implied at the end there. That Gatsby turned out all right in the end is thus essential to the novel's vision of a transcendent and collective Americanism. So this idea that that's needed, right? If we were just left with Gatsby not being all right in the end and worth more than everyone else, because he has that hope, that's the hope that saves and redeems him, this would be a very harsh view of America. But really what he's saying is this idea of this constant dedication to pursuit and to self-improvement is the spirit of America, and that the Daisies and the Toms and the Nicks and the Jordans of the world are the people who've not worth, they're a rotten bunch, right? Let's think of the flip side. Gatsby embodies the corrupt materialism of the American dream. Here, for example, we've got his link to Meyer Wolfsheim. Now, a name chosen to indicate a link with Jewish heritage here, and thus linking with Fitzgerald did have various stereotypical views of Jewish people bordering on what we would consider unacceptable today, absolutely. So this idea then of linking with lower status people in society who at the time would have been judged and viewed as corrupt, etc., in this Christian world. Obviously, we don't believe this. This idea of this is how he's presented intentionally. This idea of him being a gambler, someone who fixes the World Series. So that means it's actually illegal to do, but it makes the players lose the World Series, the biggest baseball competition in America, on purpose so that the bets all work out in their favor. So thus immoral, criminal, and immediately linking with that. So Gatsby, sure, has everything, but at what cost? Same with this, he took what he could get ravenously and unscrupulously. So this means like immorally, right? Gatsby, even as a young man, taking. This is an idea of giving. This isn't Ben Franklin establishing universities, establishing public libraries, trying to better society. He's just taking what he can get, whatever cost. It's like Gatsby is getting completely consumed by this greed, consumerism, materialism that is making him immoral as well. And the same with even Tom, this fundamentally immoral character. We think we don't like him. Uh, is someone who condemns Gatsby and sees the immorality of Gatsby, which just highlights it for us, but perhaps is also extremely ironic for us. Tom says, I found out what your quote unquote drugstores were. He turned to us and spoke rapidly. He and this Wolfsheim bought up a lot of side street drugstores here and in Chicago and sold grain alcohol over the counter. That's one of his little stunts. I picked him for a bootlegger the first time I saw him, and I wasn't far wrong. This idea of the truthfulness and the morality of Gatsby, the illusion of Gatsby is all being destroyed, and he's just shown to be a gangster, a criminal, etc. This idea of Chicago being referenced, and it's referenced quite a few times, is implied to be a link to gangsters and criminals, particularly in bootlegging, so particularly in alcohol sales, illegal alcohol sales, and gun running. In the phrasing Chicago is linked to Al Capone, who's one of the biggest names in that world and in that time. This links, of course, to Gatsby's name for himself as well. Gats or Gat is slang for gun at the time. So this idea that he is linked intrinsically in this conception of himself to guns, violence, not in the way that Tom is, but in a way of doing whatever it takes to get ahead, sort of scrabbling at. And remember, this is prohibition, so the consumption and sale of alcohol is illegal. And so for him to buy up drugstores, places of medicine, in order to sell alcohol, this is not only illegal to do, it's also against what the temperance movement was trying to achieve, which was that alcohol was a cause of social harm at the time. And so the temperance movement, which got the 18th Amendment created and passed, was trying to curb the immoral behaviors of society that was linked to alcohol. So drunk driving, a lot of the violence linked to alcohol, the behaviors linked to alcohol, etc. And so for him to sort of sell this as medicine, thus links to this complete corruption and immorality, right? Of meant to be medicine, meant to be things that are good for people, and it's actually doing active harm as alcohol. And the idea that it's not possible for him to have achieved this, in Tom's view in particular, without some kind of criminality, thus really shows the seedy underbelly of the American dream, right? The people who achieve it, have they done it because they've been stamping on other people to get ahead or doing immoral things to get ahead? Next one, almost at the moment when Mr. Gatsby identified himself, a butler hurried towards him with the information that Chicago was calling him on the wire. So these kind of seedy business deals, it keeps being Chicago, Chicago, Chicago. We don't know what he's doing, but we know it's something that's not legal or not entirely legal. It could be gun running, it could be more bootlegging, it could be gambling, it could be extortion, it could be loads of different bits here. But again, Chicago keep being mentioned. We're thinking Al Capone, we're thinking gangsters, and particularly Al Capone, gun running, extortion, mob style hits and violence, and alcohol. And so this is a little seed and motif sort of carried on these references. It's just sort of underpins this immorality all the way through. And then this is Gatsby offering Nick a business opportunity or a business connection, as Wolfsheim says, in return for Nick helping Gatsby with Daisy. And Nick does not like this offer, A, and B, doesn't like the fact that he knows that Gatsby feels like he has to offer him something in exchange. Because for Gatsby, then this reveals this idea of expectation of exchange, an eye for an eye kind of attitude. It's just that things aren't freely given. People aren't kind and help out because it's the right thing to do or because they should or they want to, but rather so they can get something out of it. Again, that corruption and moral decay. And Gatsby says, it wouldn't take up much of your time. Red flag number 1. You might pick up a nice bit of money. Red flag number 2. Happens to be a rather confidential sort of thing. This hedging. Red flag number 3. And this idea it's confidential. Gatsby is going to get Nick into this, whatever it is he's doing, so that he can help Nick out, make a bit of money, but he won't say what it is. And that distance from us as well allows our imagination thus to continue making these conclusions for ourselves, and that we think, what is this that he is up to? We don't know. This is Owl Eyes here next. Absolutely real, have pages and everything. I thought they'd be of a nice, durable cardboard. Matter of fact, they're absolutely real. Knew when to stop too, didn't cut the pages. Now, we've spoken about this quotation before, talking about the books in Gatsby's library. Owl Eyes thinks they're fake books and they're just cardboard. But they're not, they're real books, but he didn't cut the pages, so he didn't actually read them, which shows this idea of corruption. He buys all the things, but doesn't actually read the book, so he doesn't ever learn anything, doesn't improve himself and his character through reading. He just has to have. The point of a book is not to show it off, right? To show off your fabulous library. The point of buying a book is to read it, right? To learn from it. But that shows that Gatsby is missing the point entirely. So he's just this superficial consumer who buys books so that he can fill a library because rich people have libraries. And that huge place there, I love it, but I don't see how you live there all alone. This is Daisy. Again, ironic. Daisy also reveals how the veneer of upper class experience is actually not what it's cracked up to be. But even Daisy sees that huge house of Gatsby's that's empty. And thus this shows this corruption of, sure, he has a big house, but it's empty. This idea of all of these dreams being empty, all of this pursuit having an emptiness to it of money, because money is unfulfilling and the pursuit of money will never stop in this corrupt society of the roaring 20s in which having, buying is all people want to do. Saunders says Daisy, a rather soiled and cheapened figure. Such an interesting way to think about Daisy as someone who is no longer this idealized figure, is Gatsby's ultimate goal in the concept of the American dream. However, he falls victim to his own preachings. He comes to believe himself omniscient, above the restrictions of society and morality. So the fact that he doesn't follow society's rules. His presumption extends to a belief that he can even transcend the natural boundaries placed upon human beings. He will win back Daisy by recapturing the past. So literally, he will accrue so much money that he can do whatever he wants, including turn back time if he wants to. It's just a matter of money. It's not a matter of human limitations. Like Milton's Mammon in Paradise Lost, Gatsby is going to achieve his ends through sheer materialistic means, through the power he thinks he commands through his wealth, from his wealth, which means, again, that Fitzgerald's pointing out that because Gatsby is unable to achieve the past, there are limits to wealth here. Hollister says his Marie Antoinette music rooms parallel him again to Myrtle with her multiple scenes of ladies swinging in the gardens of Versailles. So Marie Antoinette, French Revolution, this idea of the privileged few, materialism, superficiality being eventually rejected by the masses. Yes, firstly, so he is a Marie Antoinette in a way, as are the Daisies and the Toms, who have run the show for far too long as a result of their wealth and should be overthrown for a more egalitarian society that the French Revolution was also hoping to inspire. But also the idea of the fatal element to Marie Antoinette, right? Someone who had excess and sought excess. But it all came to naught because she was executed and killed the same way that Gatsby was. And Myrtle. Because they could never achieve that. Fahey says a dream based on the assumption that material possessions are synonymous with happiness, harmony, and beauty. And that's the real nut of this, right? Is that this is not true, and thus people who try to achieve it will not, or it will be revealed that it's not worth it. And Saunders again, Gatsby is a perverted god. By this we mean a twisted, wrong god, who is dedicated to the physical rather than the spiritual world. Gatsby has come to espouse the gospel of the corrupted American dream. So he is preaching the American dream, but he becomes a cautionary tale of the American dream. His existence is founded on a lie, a delusion, and he terms this monstrous lie God's truth in relating to Nick, his past. So there, the irony, right? It's all fake. He's made it all up, but he says, oh, this is God's truth, which again adds this extra layer of proselytizing falsely. And then finally, Gatsby is doomed to fail in his quest to achieve the American dream because it's a myth. So let's see how this is a myth then. Tom, for example, says an Oxford man, he was incredulous. Like hell he is, he wears a pink suit. So it's juxtaposition of two different ideas here. You can't possibly be an Oxford man if you wear a pink suit. There are divisions between the upper class and everyone else, which means one can't climb over that barrier. Same with this again, Tom. A lot of these newly rich people are just big bootleggers, you know. This is the idea that newly achieved success, you'll never still be able to access what the American dream is, because the American dream is based on the idealized, nostalgic view of the upper class. So you might have money, but you still might not have class. And this idea that the upper class people will still resist and reject Gatsby and people like him because they want to preserve their own distance from it. Daisy as well, she was appalled by West Egg. West Egg, of course, being the setting and symbol of the new rich and the nouveau riche and the Gatsbys of the world who try and make it but cannot become or cannot access East Egg. This unprecedented place, literally in quotations here, place. So it's like it's not even a place, it's not even real. So there's fantasy or this imitation here that Broadway had begotten upon a Long Island fishing village. So then the history here of this being a working class place, that other working class but newly glamorous ideas, modern ideas have sort of transposed onto. So then the history of this, and the newness of this and the pop culture of this means that it can never be an East Egg. And the fact that Daisy is appalled by it rather than interested in it or accepting of it or fascinated with it shows this, again, this rejection. And this idea that even though East Egg is near West Egg is not East Egg. And there is an unsurpassable gulf between the two, which is the bay, symbolically. Then here, this is in the confrontation scene, J. Gatsby in quotations, because now again it becomes just an idea rather than a person. J. Gatsby, the concept of J. Gatsby, the platonic image of J. Gatsby had broken up like glass against Tom's hard malice. Tom, embodiment of the upper class, broken up like glass suggests the fragility of this American dream, the illusion of it. He's created this whole concept of himself, but it's made of glass, so it can fracture immediately and break to pieces if the upper class oppresses it or smashes it. This is even when he's younger, Gatsby. He had come in contact with such people, like Daisy, but always with indiscernible barbed wire between. So there is this barbed wire, and particularly thinking about the First World War and the use of barbed wire, really for the first time, this idea of some restrictive, militant barrier between them that's indicative of these pre-war class divisions that people hope to transcend but can't. Next, again, confrontation scene. It passed. He began to talk excitedly to Daisy, denying everything, defending his name against accusations that had not been made. So he's trying to say, I'm not a bootlegger, I'm not fake, I'm not a criminal, etc. But with every word, she was drawing further and further into herself. So he gave that up, and only the dead dream there, oof, right, prefiguring Myrtle's death and Gatsby's own death, the death of the American dream and the end of the novel, so in a way, the death of the story. As the afternoon slipped away, this idea of loss, again prefiguring that beat back ceaselessly into the past. This idea of it's reaching out, we can't reach it, we're losing her again. He had her, now she's slipping away again, and the gulf is being reminded. Trying to touch what was no longer tangible, struggling unhappily, despairingly towards that lost voice across the room. Again, distance. So we lose it. He had it for a moment, just almost in his reach, and he loses it. This then, the T.J. Eckelberg here, an important quotation, an important symbol. But above the grey land and the spasms of bleak dust which drift endlessly over it, you perceive, after a moment, the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg. The eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg are blue and gigantic. Their retinas are 1 yard high, so 3 feet a meter high. They look out of no face, but instead from a pair of enormous yellow spectacles which pass over a non-existent nose. Evidently some wild wag of an oculist set them there to fatten his practice in the borough of Queens, then sat down himself into eternal blindness, or forgot them and moved away. But his eyes, dimmed a little by many paintless days under sun and rain, brood on over the solemn dumping ground. So what do we have here? And this idea that this is an advert, right? But there's also this kind of mystical eyes here looking out over everyone. Wilson calls the eyes of God, right? God can see you, God is watching, etc. And this grey land looking over a wasteland, the Valley of Ashes. But it's an idea of vision. We're seeing, and this yellowness, yellow, decay, gold, faded, all those elements still linked together with Gatsby's car and Daisy and the gold and the house and everything. And it links to this superficiality of wealth and fame, this idea of this eye doctor wanting to fatten his practice. So buying this huge advert, this huge pompous, wild, unusual advert in order to get more business and to make more money. But the idea that, okay, he had enough money to do that, but it's still fading. Nature is still fading it and chipping it, and it's dimmed. So showing this idea that the hubris of man, right? They try and look out, they try and become God, but then not. And they will fade away eventually. And look at what they're looking at, this idea of corruption and death. We could also argue that these eyes are the eyes of God, but in this break of religion, in this loss of faith, looking at God again, not as a good and benevolent God, but as a indifferent God who is gazing out and not helping people, but rather sort of judging impassively. And then sinking down into the eternal blindness. Is that death? Is that corruption? It's hard to say. Blindness and sight and vision, of course, with ideal versus reality, or illusion versus reality, or self-deception versus reality is an important theme here. And this idea of self-awareness and clarity, juxtaposing Gatsby's blindness. He can't see what's real and what's not, and the fact that he can't achieve or can't even see Daisy as a real person. again, fails to achieve. So they used to go there by the hundreds. These are the people at Gatsby's house. And then the poor son of a blank here. Something that, interestingly enough, someone said at Fitzgerald's funeral when he died very young of complications with addiction, etc. So this idea again, this fall from grace. Yes, people came to his house, but not because they loved him, and he had a funeral all to himself and alone. And then this, we see boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into this past. So this idea of the inevitability that you're going to fail here. Finally, we have a lot of quotations from critics about this, but we are running over a little bit, so I'll just speed through these quickly. Stavely, for example, says Gatsby, like America itself, strives to reach a place he's created in his own mind, an impossible perfect. So the idea that this is futile from the beginning. Saunders said Gatsby lies dead, a victim of his own absurd aspirations. So this idea that there was no way, his own pursuit of the American dream is what doomed him. Saunders also says, as a prophet of the American dream, Gatsby fails miserably, a victim of his own warped idealism and false set of values. The American dream is not to be a reality in that it no longer exists, except in the minds of men like Gatsby, who it destroys in their espousal and relentless pursuit of it. The American dream is in reality a nightmare. What a quotation, right? Think of this idea that people like Gatsby are destroyed by their pursuit here of the American dream. The American dream is a self-destructive cycle. Saunders also said Gatsby is the son of God, however, not the God of divine love, but the God of material love, Mammon. He is Mammon resurrected by the hedonism of the 1920s. So this idea of a modern social ill. The modern God is the God of wealth, and the idea that society has got it wrong. They've maybe become disillusioned about God in a religious way, but they've put their new faith, their new fixation on the incorrect thing. Will has a lot to say in that Gatsby, a figure marked by failure and shadowed by death throughout most of the novel, nevertheless achieves a form of greatness in the final paragraphs of his story. It is at this point, in the words of Lionel Trilling, that Gatsby comes inevitably to stand for American itself. So America, Gatsby, linked. Will said, Gatsby is a figure whose obscenity lies in the challenge he poses to the presentable, to the natural and the normal. So he is obscene, he's uncouth, he's unacceptable because he is fighting against what's natural, these natural, supposedly, natural class distinctions, etc. He wants to transcend what humans are possible of doing. Will also says Gatsby is the threatening figure of the alien, this idea of someone who doesn't belong, threatening Tom's way of life. Will says also efforts directed against Gatsby and his elusiveness, efforts either to make sense of Gatsby's character, as in Nick's effort to reveal Gatsby's formative past, or to cast him as inherently corrupt and obscene, which is what Tom does, as outside the boundaries of sense, propriety, and order, as racially and sexually perverse. So this is linking to the idea that perhaps Gatsby's name Gats comes from either German origins and thus as the opponent of America in the World War, literally this kind of enemy figure, or perhaps linked again with a Jewish identity that Nick and Tom would not have associated with because they would have viewed as a different class and even perhaps as a different race. Will also says the final lines of Gatsby establish America as an eternal mode of human yearning, as a quest narrative that stretches across generations from the Dutch to Gatsby, so making that intergenerational link then. And hence from the Dutch to Gatsby to us. It eluded us then. So that's that quotation again, eluded us. So then Gatsby is us. We are Gatsby. To be sure, this passage is also haunted by another idea of America, of an old island that precedes the transforming gaze of the colonists, and that, like Myrtle's torn and bloody breast, seems momentarily to challenge and render ironic the final transcendent vision of the fresh green breast of the New World. So then that's that link between the fresh green breast and Myrtle, is the trajectory of the American dream. McKendrick said the Gatses of this world can never long possess the daisy phase. The distance from the clam flats of Lake Superior to ripe mystery, the gay and radiant activities of Daisy's father's house in Louisville is too great to be bridged even by the colossal accidents of a war and a post-war. So there is no way that she can do that. Hollister said yellow is not quite gold and Gatsby is not quite up to the social gold standard. So he can have yellow, for example, his yellow house, yellow car, etc., but he can't possess the gold that Daisy has and the gold that Daisy is metaphorically. Hollister also says if Eckelberg is a mock god, then Gatsby, though self-sacrificial, is a mock Christ, with no disciples who cannot save even one Daisy. So this idea that Eckelberg, if he's the eyes of God in this society, then Gatsby is the Jesus who sacrifices himself for the sake of God, but cannot actually save anyone. So it's all futile again. Hollister also says, in a suite at the Plaza Hotel, they drink mint juleps and Tom confronts Gatsby like a southern overseer, phrasing from sort of a pre-Civil War, antebellum South and West. So this idea that he is literally a voice of the past in terms of power. I suppose the latest thing, and this is a quote from Tom, as if it would be acceptable if Gatsby was a somebody from somewhere. Tom the cheater is suddenly a defender of traditional values. The irony of Tom then as a character, right? And the fact that Tom seemingly then would not care if Gatsby wasn't Mr. Nobody from nowhere, making love to his wife. And by making love, he means, falling in love with, being in love with, having an affair with, not necessarily the physical act. This idea that Tom wouldn't care as much if Gatsby was a social equivalent to Tom, right? He would be less threatened by the J. Gatsby, who Tom feels has no right to be anywhere near Daisy. That's more of the problem for him. And Hollister as well, the strongest implication here is that Wilson's belief that God sees everything is a false dogma. If a deity exists at all, he is as blind as Dr. Eckelberg. So this would be shocking, but very much in line with what the modernist view was of God and society, was that if there's a God, he's one that's blind. That is incredibly blasphemous to previous generations, but that's the point, right? It's meant to be shocking as well. Fitzgerald's plot confirms this belief. Wilson is not a religious man. He invokes God only in desperation. His outburst is comparable to swearing. If he truly believed what he declares, that God sees everything, he would not commit murder. A victim himself, he lives in the secular wasteland covered with ash. He is in effect a blind disciple, an agent of Eckelberg, embodying the wasteland, the death of religious faith, morality, hope, and truth in the modern world. That is the allegorical meaning of his killing Gatsby. So he then is a blind disciple of this wealth and kills the Gatsby in it. And thus, all of these things die too. The billboard Dr. Eckelberg is Fitzgerald's image of what has replaced God. Commerce in a materialistic spiritual wasteland where idealism is as dead as Gatsby at the end. So now for Fitzgerald, America is not the green light and the fresh green breast, but rather the valley of ashes. That's what he's saying, and condemning society like that. If we think about how to conceive of this as an idea, then we can break this down into different arguments and think about tracing the American dream from the beginning, from its hope and idealism, to perhaps focusing on figures like the green light and Daisy, and Gatsby as embodiments of the American dream, or the pursuit of the American dream. Then moving into the corruption of the American dream, the materialism of the American dream, and then perhaps its failed quest, and perhaps even a paragraph on looking at the ending and showing this two conflicting ideas of America and the American Dream, the fresh green breast and the green light versus the Valley of Ashes as this final American vision, and this continuous pursuit that then links to us in this intergenerational American dream and its futility. That brings us to the end of our lesson. Thank you so much to everyone who contributed and everyone who attended today. We will be having a break for 2 weeks, so we will be reconvening in our lessons on the 15th of April. And from then, of course, we will meet every Wednesday, continue with that from 6:50 to 8:20, or perhaps 8:30 if we have a little bit of things we need to finish off, and watch this space for more exam masterclasses for drama and for poetry in preparation of mocks or exams. Look forward to seeing you there. Happy spring break to everyone, and bye for now.